Hi, everybody, and welcome back to Sam's Healing Podcast. Today, we are all in for a treat because she probably one of the most lovable guests and definitely one of the most informative. Dr. Jill Manning is back. So, Dr. Manning, how are you? And thank you for coming back in.
I'm well, and thank you. This is a treat to be here and linking arms again.
Today's going to be a follow-up from our original discussion, which was 5 markers of emotional immaturity. But before we do that, for those that maybe didn't see episode 1, or for those that maybe don't remember much about you, why don't you take a couple minutes, talk about who you are, what you do. Anybody that watched the first episode understands that you have a PhD and you're brilliant and you know how to convey helpful information. That's for darn sure. But talk a little bit about what you do and where they can find you.
Sure. Thank you. So I'm Jill Manning, and I'm originally from Canada. I was born in Germany and from Canada, came to the States for graduate school. And I mention that because sometimes people ask me, what's your accent? Where are you from? So if you hear a little twinge of something you don't recognize, and I spent half my childhood in Australia, so there's a little mix of an Aussie touch in there. So that's that. But professionally, I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist, and I practice here in Colorado, just outside of Boulder in a town called Louisville. And my specialty is I work exclusively with those that have been betrayed, most commonly sexually betrayed through compulsive behaviors or affairs, anything in that camp. So I've done research in this space, writing in this space, and my main focus is clinical work, working one-on-one with individuals.
Fantastic. Last time we talked about 5 markers of emotional immaturity, and then you offered up an acronym and talked about having difficulty with egocentrism and affective realism, difficulty with self-reflection, difficulty with intimacy, and difficult with empathy and emotional intimacy. And you said it best when we talked about our content, admitting that you are or that you struggle with emotional immaturity can feel like our shame button gets triggered. Mm-hmm. And we can feel like, gosh, I'm just an idiot, or I'm just a loser, and I'm just a mess up. And unfaithfuls, whether we're male or female, we have such a quick propensity to slide into shame and make it about ourselves. So before we get into today's conversation, what's a good disclaimer to help those that might be prone to hitting their shame button and starting to get really down on themselves?
Sure. Great starting point, Sam. So the disclaimer in the preface would be, we're all growing, and immaturity actually serves a purpose. Every single one of us born on this planet enter in a state of immaturity. That's how we're designed to be. And when you look at the definition of maturity, I love it because I think it's so hopeful. So I'm going to do this in 2 parts. If you look up maturity, it's the state of being mature. And if you look up mature, I think it's so hopeful. It says fully developed or fully grown. So I think of wholeness. I think of healing. So anyone listening, the demographic that's listening to podcasts like this, that in and of itself is a sign of maturity. People that are leaning toward material that helps support growth and healing. So anyone listening, you're on track. Wherever you're at, you're on track to even be open to content like this and to be learning and growing and all that good stuff. So all of us are in this boat. There's not one of us walking around that has completely evolved and fully developed. And so it's something that's somewhat of a moving target. Till the end of our days, we'll be striving, I hope, for greater wholeness, right? Greater development and growth and therefore more maturity. So I really want to normalize this and that we're all in this together. There's no, when we're talking about maturity, especially, there's no room for one-upping, because that's actually immaturity, right? When we think, oh, I'm so above this, or I'm so below it's going one up or one down is actually indicative of our need for growth and more wholeness.
It's a great point. When I ask people before this session, I met with a new couple as clients and said, so what have you been doing? And unfortunately, very common, the betrayed was like, well, I'm doing this and I'm doing this and I'm doing this. And I said to the unfaithful, so what about you? Well, I did a little bit. So for those of you that are watching and listening, the very fact that you're here today is a sign that something inside of you wants to get better, to do better, to have a better relationship, to have a better recovery. And on behalf of Dr. Manning and myself, we honor that. You're not here because you've already got it figured out. I'm quite sure. You're not here because you've already figured everything out. So whether you're unfaithful or betrayed, we're just glad that you're here, because dealing with the residue of emotional immaturity from our parents or from our own life to our own kids can be devastating. And being able to stop the trauma from being passed down, being able to heal, possibly save your relationship, is one of the most courageous things that you can do. So for those that are trying to find some solutions, when you work with people and help them really try to emotionally mature, what are some ways, what are some starting points that they can take to really start to grow themselves up, as John Lee would say, who I had in last time? What are some ways that they can become mature and develop?
Well, the good and hopeful news, I think, is that there's no magic button. There's no, secret sauce that you need to go on a quest for. It's when we're doing our work, whatever that work is, whatever work is helping us reduce suffering and grow, is in and of itself a process of maturing. So I want to convey that, because I know what it feels like, where you're struggling with something and someone says something and it feels like, oh, one more thing, or
right.
Oh, maybe I'm not on the right path. So, a path toward growth and healing is a path toward maturing. So that's the good news. We can work smart, but one of the very first steps is to recognize that immaturity is often rooted in trauma.
Really?
So, because we get stuck when you think of being a kid or a young adult, often where we get stuck is where something bad happened that shouldn't have happened, or something good was needed, but we didn't either get that or get enough of it.
Right.
Right. And in those points of deficits or things that didn't happen or did happen, we get stuck because those things are needful for becoming whole and mature. So any kind of trauma work, any type of healing work that's helping us reflect and understand more clearly, how did I get here? What happened to me? Where's the pain? Is going to be an important foundation for understanding where did we get stuck in our ego states and get young. Mm-hmm. And then dealing with whatever that is does help us mature, because we're filling the cup where it didn't get filled, so there we can move on to the next thing developmentally. And so let's assume that people are in some version of that kind of healing work, greater insight, they're understanding their story. One of the things that I think is I don't want to say easy to do, but it's important, and anybody can do this. That's a better way of saying it, is Good. To be able to visualize what maturity means for you. Like to have a vision. We can't go somewhere where we don't know where we're going, or what are the characteristics or traits of that. So one thing I like to do, Sam, is to ask people, what does immaturity mean to you? How does that show up? How do you spot it? How do you spot it in yourself, and how do you spot it in others? And then also, how do you spot maturity? What does that mean? How do you spot it in yourself? How do you spot it in others? And if you start asking people, what does maturity mean to you? you'll get some funny answers. I asked my teenage daughter, tween, I should say, last
Right.
week. I was preparing. I asked her, what does that mean to you? And her answer cracked me up. She said, "Well, I think people with British accents are very mature." So, okay, well,
fantastic.
we're not going to all
Right.
adapt that. And I've met my share of Brits who are immature as well. So that's not going to help. But I think her cute answer underscores that it is important for each of us to clarify, what does that mean even? And so if I were to ask you, Sam, a slightly different question, is there someone in your life that represents or that you consider a mature person?
Yeah, and I think that's indicative of it was not modeled for me as a child. And it was not modeled for me even until I started to do my own work and work with people like, whether it be Rick Reynolds, and get to know people like Michael Webb or James Annear, Amanda Isproni, Sharon Reinerson, these type of people who are mature, but they're not perfect. They haven't figured it all out. They're still doing their work. I tell my clients, never see somebody that isn't seeing someone themselves.
Agreed.
But wouldn't you agree that it's hard, as a point of self-compassion, it's hard to expect us to be emotionally mature when it wasn't modeled and it wasn't really parented very well inside of us growing up?
Oh, agreed. And I think that's the lion's share of us. And I'm including myself. That's most of us, because we do live in a culture that will, especially in media, will hold up and glamorize and sensationalize very immature traits.
Yes, absolutely. All day long.
Exactly. And so I think that question of what does it mean? What does it look like? How do you spot it is really the starting point. And so if I were to ask you, and you don't have to name names if you don't want to, but what are some of the traits? I mean, you did name some names. If you were to generalize and summarize, what are some of the characteristics of those individuals what is it about them that strikes you as mature?
Yeah, I think as we get older, we can identify incredible courage in people because of what they've gone through, what they have handled, what they've overcome. I teach my clients, when they're dealing with family of origin work or childhood trauma, to be able to understand when they're trying to grow themselves up. Sometimes it's very courageous to say, I will handle this and I'm going to handle it. And I've handled everything thus far, so I'm going to handle this too, because you know what? It's time that I can rely upon myself. It's time that I can believe that I'm capable, because so many people are struggling to be able to rise to the challenges, especially when you're dealing with infidelity or addiction, because many of them have found themselves in a situation that they never wanted to be in, but had no idea that it would avalanche into what they're into, right? And that they would find themselves where they're at. So they're constantly, my clients come to me, they're constantly looking for someone that can make sense out of it all. So maybe it's about maturity is when people can help make sense out of your own trauma and your own chaos with grit and practical answers for how to not just survive, but to actually live and find a new life, right? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and so I want to build off this for a moment. I'm going to share some characteristics that I noticed. So we're going to start off very subjective here, and then we're going to go clinically to some points that I hope will be helpful and kind of more general, foundational ideas to think about this. So, I'm thinking of a mentor that I just cherish her. And when I think of what is it about her that just feels so mature, and I feel safe with her. There's a humility about her. She's curious. She's very grounded. And there's that sense of no matter what comes up, she'll know how to handle it. Even if she doesn't know the answer, there's just something very reassuring about people that are mature. And I want to state maturity can be linked and associated with age, but This is not about age.
Right.
This is not about age. So if we ripped up, birth certificates, driver's licenses, this is about our emotional age, our emotional maturity. I want to state that because So I'm going to share some characteristics. These are based off of Pia Melody's work. And if anyone last time when we talked, I know we relied heavily on Dr. Lindsay Gibson's work, which is phenomenal. And today I want to really pull from Pia Melody's work because she developed a whole model of therapy called post-induction therapy, PIT work for short. And her model of therapy addresses developmental immaturity and helps people become more functional as adults. So I find it a very hopeful, forward-moving type of model. Yeah. So I wanted to pull on her work today. And she does a lot of work, or in the past, did a lot of work with addictions. So she summarizes, the ways to spot immaturity. And I'm going to list some of these. People that are very black and white, perfectionistic, relentless. There's just like this compulsive drive about them. They're very automatic, knee-jerk reactions. They are reactive. Someone who's immature will tend to lack that sense of reflection about themselves and just act, right? They tend to be more harsh and rigid in their approach to life, and tightness in the body, right? Which when we're in fight or flight or that stress response, now a caveat there, all of us, when we're under the right kind of stress or we're tired or we're sick, I think our maturity can go out the window pretty quickly. So, absolutely. We need some graciousness and for ourselves and others when we're in those tough spots. So another trait that Pia mentions is just being out of balance. We're too much or too little. Like it's just this seesaw, this ping-ponging all the time. And there's a fragility about our ego where we tend to be easily offended, easily angered, easily upset. You fill in any of those. And sometimes the reverse is true, where we're underreacting. We may not be feeling enough or responding enough to certain things. So I know that's a whole long list of traits and characteristics, but if you really stop and think about people you consider immature, you'll notice some of those patterns that I've just mentioned. Now, on the flip side, because we want this to be really about resolution and hope today, and what's the solution? So when we look at characteristics of functional adults, mature adults, and I'm saying adults specifically, not because children can't be mature. They can be incredibly wise and mature at times. But when we're expecting young people to be mature, that can in and of itself be a source of relational trauma, when we're expecting a young person to be older emotionally than they really are. Right. And that's important because sometimes people will mistake and confuse age, as I mentioned a moment ago. And they'll see a young person that's acting so mature, no behavior problems, like crossing all T's and I's. And sometimes we will inadvertently praise or think that that's a good thing. It can in certain situations, but often clinically, Sam, that indicates to me someone that had to grow up too fast and that may have unrealistic expectations put on them. They may be parentified or treated like a mini adult. So I'm specifically saying maturity in adulthood, because that's when we need it. And that's when it is developmentally appropriate and expected. So characteristics of mature adults, they're more nuanced. They're able to be more flexible in their thinking. They're able to be realistic. That means they take reality on reality's terms. They're not minimizing, diluting, or denying reality, or making reality something that it's not. They're able to really take it square in the eye and then cope or deal with that. They're forgiving. Now, that doesn't mean they let anything go. We can be very highly boundaried and forgiving. But we don't have that rigid core that's holding grudges and in a funk or pouty, right? We're able to be warm and yielding, humble, and there's there's more of a groundedness and a relaxation in the body, right? Which I think is one of the reasons why you feel more settled, more calm when you're with someone that's mature. There's you can kind of breathe. You don't feel like strung out when you're with someone that's mature often. And so there's also a balance. People that are mature tend to be more balanced. They don't have to go to extremes to get needs met or to communicate what's going on for them. So my first tip would be for anyone listening, visualize what your functional adult, mature adult looks like. How does he or she stand, speak, dress, act? What are the types of boundaries they hold in different situations? And in some of my therapy groups, Sam, I will do a guided visualization and meditation that walks people through in invitations to visualize those different things. And you know what's so fascinating? Almost without exception, when I do that, everyone's eyes are closed because they're just deep in thought and visualizing what their mature functional adult looks like. And almost every single time before that closes, that meditation, people are sitting taller. You'll see their chest rise, their spine kind of elongate naturally and I'm not saying, elongate your spine.
Yeah, right.
Strength the top of your head. It's so interesting how being mature in a healthy way, there is something that helps us tap into our best self and kind of lift up and be more hopeful and positive. I know for myself, when I'm under a lot of stress, when I'm upset, and I'm sure, well, I shouldn't say sure. I bet John Lee, when he spoke in his podcast, probably mentioned something about this, that we get impatient when we go young. And, we're moodier, all those types of things. I know for myself, my sense of humor goes right out the window. And that's actually
right.
That's one of my clues. Whoa, slow down. I need to take care of myself, take a break. I need to, for me, spend some time alone and reconnect, like what's coming up right now. So
let me ask you this. No, I'm sorry, but I think that's a good point. Now, the sad thing is, for someone that's dealing with betrayal trauma, male or female, they could listen to that and say, Sam, Dr. Manning, I am so far from that.
Mm-hmm.
I am so traumatized. I have either PTSD or complex PTSD, or I just feel crazy.
Yeah.
And that sounds awesome, but that sounds a galaxy away.
Mm-hmm.
Because I'm trying to hold on for dear life every day. So how do we help a betrayed male or female who's struggling with this to even maybe try it? Is it, hey, give it a shot? Is it, hey, this will help you? Is it, listen, a journey of 1,000 miles starts with one step? Is it, this could be a grounding exercise? How do you help the betrayed that's like, this seems so foreign to me because I'm a train wreck because of all that I've been put through? How do we help them?
Excellent point. And I could see how, me mentioning sense of humor could even be offensive. Like, really, Jill? Really? I'm being immature if I don't find humor in something? No, not at all. And what I would say, here's the bridge. Here's the bridge, is that when we're dealing with betrayal trauma, our betrayal trauma work will naturally help us mature. And so let me give the 5 key pillars of developing maturity. And this is based on Pia's work. So these are the 5 things we build when we are when we are working on maturity. But guess what? They're also the 5 pillars of trauma work.
No, that's awesome.
So this all works.
I love it.
Okay. So the first one is there's 5 key traits of adults that are mature and functioning. Their life works. They have self-esteem. They feel connected to that sense of internal inherent worth and value, and they're able to recognize the value of other people. So when someone's dealing with a lot of trauma and they've been betrayed and they're feeling like, what was wrong with me? Why did my partner do this? Right? And they're getting dissociated from their inherent value. That's when we're bringing them back and getting really clear on what's in our control, what's out of our control, who's responsible for what, and helping someone get reconnected to that sense of inherent value that is not changed one iota by
Right.
someone else's choices. Okay, so that's the first thing. Self-esteem. A functional, mature adult will be connected to their inherent worth and recognize the worth in others. The second one is boundaries. So when it is extremely mature of a betrayed partner to be identifying what boundaries do I need to feel safe and to stop the room from spinning? What are the things I need to act on to feel like I can manage this? And so boundaries with self and boundaries with others, those are the two big categories. I think sometimes in betrayal work, we focus not enough on boundaries with self. We focus so much, there's been incoming threats, from, and that makes all the sense in the world. But over time, in a period of months, I do want clients working on where are the boundaries with myself. If I'm ruminating 23 hours a day, if I'm telling the grocery checkout clerk that I've been betrayed and where I'm telling too much or not telling enough in the right places, I need to shore up my boundaries with myself. Reality, as I mentioned a few minutes ago, a mature adult will be aware of their reality and the reality around them. And reality defined by PMLity, that's being in touch and aware of my thoughts, my feelings and emotions, my body, my behavior, and recognizing and being aware of what's going on in those dimensions with people around me. Being able to be curious or spot that. And then to not minimize, deny, or dissociate from that, to be able to manage reality on reality's terms.
Yeah, it's beautiful.
The fourth is needs and wants. Am I able to identify my needs and wants? A lot of people struggle with that. They may have grown up in a home where their needs and wants didn't matter. Maybe a narcissistic parent or an alcoholic parent's needs were paramount. And a child no one was ever curious to even help them understand what their needs or wants were. Sometimes people may have grown up where their needs and wants were so paramount, they don't understand that other people have them as well. Right? So for all of these traits, it's like there can be extremes on both ends of the spectrum.
Without question.
Right? So getting my needs and wants met in healthy ways and understanding that it's okay to ask for help if I'm struggling or stuck in being able to get a healthy need met. Yeah. That I can recruit for help and I'm not embarrassed or ashamed to ask for help. Say, I don't know how to do this. I know I need this, but I don't know how to do this. And the last one is moderation and containment, that I'm living moderately. That doesn't mean I don't ever kick up my heels or stay up late or, but it does mean that most of my time, most of the days, I'm in a balanced place. And when I get out of balance, I recognize it. And as I'm growing and maturing, I get back into balance sooner.
I love that. I love it.
No one's going to be completely mature 24 hours a day. Even Pia says, if we can be mature, even up to 60% of the time, we've got life by the tail.
Yeah.
That gives me hope.
And let me ask you this, because we don't have time to go through all 5 of them, but the needs and wants, I have noticed when we're trying to save a relationship, when we're trying to keep it together, maybe for the kids, maybe for the history, assets, all of the above, one of the above, a lot of times we will make ourselves what is so destructive, which is needless and wantless.
Yes.
Some would call that self-abandonment, to try and save the relationship, to keep him or her home, or to keep him or her happy, and to try and it's one big giant life preserver approach. If I can just be needless and wantless, I'll keep the relationship going. And so many people try that, and it is so agonizing. So for someone who's tried to live that way, for someone who has tried to make themselves, because I know there's so many, a lot of my clients, I can tell you, they tried to live that way. How does someone who has tried to make themselves needless and wantless to make the relationship work, how do they start to repair that? How do they start to actually give themselves even permission to have needs and wants?
At the risk of sounding repetitive, which is not my aim, I think when things get to those all or nothing extremes on that spectrum, it is almost always, Sam, indicative of relational trauma early in life. So I think it's so key to rewind the tape. And sometimes that's really slow work and it needs a lot of support to figure out where in life did someone get the message that their needs were the only thing that mattered or didn't matter at all. Like that whole idea of self-sacrificing to an extreme. I mean, that ties in with that fifth point of lack of moderation or going to extremes to get our needs met, right? And so I think I personally, as a clinician, don't see people make a lot of headway unless they start to get clear on where did this come from?
Yes,
what's the root of this? Was this modeled to me by one of my parents, or did I internalize a message about my needs and wants from someone? And where I may not have had a strong enough internal boundary, I just took it in like a milkshake straw. And like, oh yeah, my needs don't matter, or my needs are the only thing that matters. So I think it's got to be back to that relational trauma work of figuring out where it came from. And then in the spirit of being moderate, I'm sure you've seen this because I know, like myself, we both work with a wide swath of people, and we're honored to do so, fortunate to do so. But I see people, they'll finally get clear on, this is what I'm doing. And we'll go to extremes. They'll do the other pendulum swing. And those extremes keep us stuck in immaturity, right? So it's learning to be patient, learning to, hey, one thing at a time, one day at a time. I'm going to focus on this one layer of this issue or thing I'm trying to improve, and to be okay with that, to embrace our humanity. And to know that, hey, growth is going to be with a different measuring stick for each of us. And there's going to be periods of rapid growth, or so it seems, and stuff that just takes years. So I think all of those mature traits, the humility, acceptance, patience, and being moderate as we chip away at this is so key. Because if we can so easily slip into perfectionism in our therapy work. I've got to get this or master this right away. And right there, we're slipping out of reality and we're getting to that immature place. A lot of us, Sam, are walking around like older teens, thinking that we're adults.
Yeah, I agree. And wouldn't you, I mean, when we talk about the five, self-esteem, boundaries, reality, needs and wants, and moderation and containment, the thread that I hear through that, and then so much of what you've also said, the thread is, to me, what sticks out is self-compassion. And I don't know that anybody is self-compassionate unless it was modeled or it was taught or both, or they come to a point in life where they start working with someone like you and learn that is actually okay. Do you feel like that's the same in your practice?
Wholeheartedly, yes. And we know actually from a lot of research in the last 20 years that learning to be more internally affirming is both a pathway to healing and a sign of healing. I know that sounds a little confusing, but learn that self-compassion, that affirmation. And affirmation is not just, throwing nice words to ourselves. Right. Or, internalizing the vinyl letters on walls or t-shirts. It's right. Really, it's meeting a need where it's at. It's recognizing where's the wound where I have shame stuck or bound. And what is the affirmation, which is truth, a validating truth that meets me right at that wound and reminds me of a truth. It may be, I do matter. I have inherent worth, so there are shame binds that we can get with any of those five areas, because when we're acting immaturely, we'll go one up or one down with our self-esteem. We'll have too many boundaries and get walled off or not enough. So each of those five traits are a continuum themselves. And so I think It is learning to be compassionate and more affirming that, hey, I'm growing today with, and just to be able to embrace that. And shame, can I say something about shame briefly?
Of course.
Because shame can come up so easily. And I love and respect the work of, people like Brene Brown and others that have really turned that whole topic on its head in some really positive ways. And I'm noticing, Sam, that shame in many ways has gotten a bad rap in recent years. Shame's a helpful emotion. It helps us understand our limits. It helps us connect with our humanity. There's gifts to shame. Now, we can feel too much shame, just like we can feel too much of any emotion. But shame, I had a colleague who I really respect, and she said, shame is the shaman of our healing. Without leaning into the shame and embracing it, we're not going to grow. And it's actually a sign of our own immaturity when we get allergic to our shame. If we're allergic to that and we have no tolerance for it, and we just sink or spin out or act out, we're going to stay stuck, immature. So
what is one
graciously
to
and
do?
slowly working through that.
What is someone to do who deals with shame? So if someone is ashamed that they have acted out or relapsed and they're circling the drain and they're just like, how does someone use that in the way that you're describing?
My hope is that shame attack can very quickly connect us with humility. Right? That's kind of like almost the positive flip side of that we won't stay isolated. We'll ask for help, because in our shame, we get very hyper autonomous. And that's where we think, I'll solve this. I'm going to figure this out on my own, which in and of itself is an immature posture to take.
Absolutely. Without question.
So
I love that.
If we can see it of, hey, I'm feeling shame. This feels terrible. But it reminds me, I'm going to use it in the language that I use with myself. Okay. And this may or may not resonate with others. But when I'm feeling a shame attack, I will say to myself, this reminds me that I'm not God and I need God.
Yep. It's great.
Whatever that means to other people, higher power, God of your understanding, something bigger than yourself. It doesn't have to be limited within a religious context, I believe. But it helps me stay connected to my humanity. I have limits. There's guardrails. And I've crossed something. So, okay, how do I get back? How do I, and use it as a way to just accept I'm human. And
I love it.
Oh God.
I love it because you're so right. We become hyper autonomous, and then we become like raging white knucklers where we're just going to make it happen. And you just can't do it without help. You can't do it without expert care. You cannot make this happen. As a good friend, Rick Reynolds, used to always say when he would talk to someone who had relapsed or they had made some terrible decisions, either an addiction or an affair, that he would say, this is what your best effort has gotten you. So perhaps it's time to get help and stop trying to do this all by yourself, because this is where your hyper autonomy has brought you.
Yes.
So on the heels of that, if people want help from you, if they want to know more about, you have courses, you have groups, you do all sorts of things to help those that are in crisis, how can they contact you or read more and find out more about your writings and your information?
Sure. Well, people can always go to my website, which is drjillmanning.com. It's loaded with resources, links, digital downloads, all that good stuff. My practice is currently full, and it's often full. And so I want to be realistic with what I'm saying out there on a podcast here, but I only work in person or remotely too with those that are residents of my state of licensure, which is Colorado. But I do offer 1-2 day intensives the second Friday and Saturday of every month. So I do have people that will fly in and work with me, which is always such a treat to meet people from different parts of the country and work with them in that way. But I do want to, I want to, there's only one of me.
Right.
And so what I want to offer a resource that's more widely available, that really has been such a gift to many of my clients. I've had close to 40 people that I personally know that have gone and come back to do family of origin trauma work that is within a functional adult maturing model. And that's the Green Shoe Foundation in Oklahoma. And what a beautiful program that is. It's a 5-day retreat. It's free. There's no cost associated with it because it's funded through the philanthropy of Chad Richardson. And so I just really praise and have so much gratitude for his generosity and work. But the Green Shoe Foundation, if people just go to greenshoe.org, they can sign up and do an intake. As long as people are 21 and older, they can do a 5-day intensive that goes through in depth the very things we've talked about today, Sam.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
As always, I know that my audience is extremely grateful for your information, but I think more importantly, your heart in which the information is disseminated, which is compassionate and kind, but a straight shooter. And that's what I love about you, is you giving palatable but yet practical information that they can start doing tonight, that they can start working on right now, because I'm quite positive that every relationship in our life could benefit if we were to mature in that relationship. So, yes, as always, thank you so much for coming in. And again, I'll have to find a way to get you back in as soon as possible. So thank you for coming, Dr. Manning.
Thank you, Sam. Good to see you.